Thank you so much. We're now going to be talking about reaching the right consumer. So how can we efficiently and effectively target our international marketing to high-value travellers who are most likely to hopefully stay longer, spend more when they're here, and disperse regionally. We love pushing our regional areas. Adam Ferrier, a massive fan of Adam. We have him on the project a lot to talk about all of the daily news and current affairs topics that pop up. He's a multi-award winning advertising creative and founder of the agency Thinkerbell. He's also a leading Australian consumer psychologist, an expert brand strategist, and an authority on behavioural economics. And he's just all around a really top bloke. Can you please welcome Adam Ferrier?
Thanks, mate. Hi, everyone. If you want to reinforce the stereotype of advertising people being wankers, have a photo like that. So, before we start, I just want to say congratulations to Tourism Australia for having a fantastic campaign, but that's not the true congratulations I want to give. That's not where the true intelligence lies. The true intelligence lies in organising a conference a month after so we can bask in their reflective glory of how smart and wonderful they are. Isn't it clever of them? The other thing I want to say to John, who I didn't realise you guys track cool so much. I did my thesis in clinical psychology on identifying the underlying constructs of cool people. What makes people cool is self-belief and confidence, defying convention, understated achievement, caring for others, and connectivity. And John, I also do personal consulting on that, and I've never met anyone more in need of my services than yourself. But anyway, so how to ingratiate yourself to a room. So who's wealthy enough to be able to come to Australia? Australia is expensive to get to, and it's a long way away, and that's the truth. And in order to come here, you have to have a lot of money. This is all the people who came over last year, roughly 8.8 million people. That represents about 0.1% of the global population. So 0.1% of the world are wealthy enough to come here. Of those people, a subsection are high-value travellers. So probably a quarter of those people, of that 0.1%, are wealthy enough to be considered high-valued travellers. And so that's 0.12 divided by a third, 0.04% of a world's population. So we're talking about a wealthy elite of people who are wealthy enough to come here and enjoy themselves. That's still a massive market, but there's no denying the fact that they've got money and that we're expensive. And price is positioning. So to us, we are a luxury purchase in lots of people's or the world's eyes. And sometimes it's really important just to look at stuff straight in the eye and deal with it. So people who come here have a lot of money. People who have a lot of money want more money. All of you have money, and all of you start buying bigger cars, bigger houses, more expensive things when you have it. We're all on a thing called the hedonic treadmill. The more money we have, the more money we want. And we keep on running around on this little rat race, and that's what keeps the economy going. Just a quick little pop question. Who here earns over 100,000? And we're just going to go up in $100,000 increments. So put your hands up or stand up if you earn over 100. I do, yeah. Dan, you do? Come on. All right, think about it really carefully then. Just think about how much money you earn and just roughly compare yourself in the room and think what percentile you lie on in terms of wealth. All right, everybody got we're going to line up from wealthiest to, no, we're not. But now that I've primed you to think about your money, I want you to do an exercise for me. I want you to create 10 words from the letters X, B, U, T, M, N, and F. At any time, and I want you to do it as quick as you can, get the 10 words. At any time, you can ask for help. I'm going to move on. Don't worry about it. It's just to get you in the zone of interactivity. Money makes us selfish. If I asked you to do that task without priming you to think about money beforehand, you would have been much more likely to ask for help quickly. You would have had less invasive, you would have had less kind of body language kind of holding onto your own space. You would have been more likely to work with other people. And so this is kind of just a chart here on this, in this particular thing, looking at the time, and looking at people who were primed with money versus those who weren't primed with money, and how quickly and likely they were to ask for help from other people. So money makes us selfish. The more we have, the more selfish we get. It also makes us mean. Who here lives in one of these suburbs? Unlikely, right? They're the generous suburbs. They're the most generous suburbs of Sydney. And the poorer the suburb, basically, so it's been kind of roughly speaking, the less wealthy the suburb, the more of a percentage of their money they give to charities. So the more money we get, the more we tend to hold on to it. And money also turns us into a bit of a dick. So this has been studied a lot by a guy called Paul Piff, a psychologist. He did a whole lot of experiments where he got people to come into a room to do an experiment, and there was a big jar of Smarties in the room, or M&Ms, and he said to the people, please don't take those M&Ms, they're for the kids for another experiment over there. They then measured the people's wealth and had a look at how many Smarties they took while they were waiting. The wealthier you were, the more entitled you felt, the more Smarties you took off the children. The actual experiment, true story, the actual experiment they then went to do was to play Monopoly. On this Monopoly game, you tossed a coin. One of you was assigned the lucky person, the other one was assigned the unlucky person. The lucky person got 2 dice, they got double the money every time they passed go, and one other thing I can't remember. The unlucky person didn't get those conditions. They then watched these 2 people play Monopoly and observed them, and that's this little figure. The rich players moved their pieces more loudly, banging them around the board. They displayed overly enthusiastic gestures. They became ruder to their opponents. And also, so they became, dicks, basically. But then they wouldn't attribute how good they were to the fact that they had all the conditions stacked in their favour, even though they both knew that. So they kind of took it on themselves to think, I'm a better Monopoly player, even though it was just purely luck. The final experiment to prove that money makes us a bit of a dick. Who here owns a Kia? Just put your hands straight up. Anyone? Not game, are you now? Who here owns a Mercedes? Straight up. So, if you do own a Mercedes versus a Kia, you are more likely to not stop for pedestrians when they're crossing the road. So, the psychologist Paul Piff and his team spent a week outside this particular walk, had a pedestrian going across. The higher status of the vehicle, the less likely they were to stop for a person crossing the road. So we are all collectively dicks. However, good news is the codes of wealth may be changing. There may be become more socio-capitalistic kind of businesses starting to form recently. There's people who seem to have a conscience, or at least have the face of having a conscience within their various business models, and you can kind of see the banter between Elon Musk and Mike Cannon-Brookes as a nice example of kind of the deformalisation of money and the more understated codes of money that are starting to occur. This is happening at the same time the world is getting wealthier. I've never once presented and my presentation correlated with that of the economist speaking before me, but this does. Middle class numbers in China are now greater than middle class in America. And GDP per capita is rising all around the world. We all know that in some markets that's being kind of increasingly unevenly distributed, which is the reason why middle class in China is now greater than middle class in America. However, we're getting wealthier. And when society gets wealthier, the need to show money as status gets less because everybody can buy the same kind of consumer goods. So we can all buy the Gucci handbag, so therefore the Gucci handbag doesn't communicate status or wealth as much as it used to because everybody can afford it. So what we need to do now is, as we get more money in our societies, is start to signal our values, what we stand for, rather than signalling our wealth to each other. And basically, the less money, the more you need bling. And then the reverse is true. The more money a culture has, the less you need bling, and the more you just need to kind of communicate your values and what you stand for. So the world in developed markets, or in markets with money, as opposed to this artificial dichotomy of developed and undeveloped, is moving conspicuous to inconspicuous consumption. So stuff that signifies your values over stuff that, stuff that has a signal value, i.e. I'm wealthy, is moving to stuff that has a kind of satisfaction value, i.e. I'm satisfied with this, I buy these goods and services because they make my life actually better in some particular way. And there's kind of data by Atlas Research to back this up. The top 1 to 5% of in America are moving away from conspicuous to inconspicuous consumption. I'll talk a little bit more about what that is. The inconspicuous consumer spends more on personal services and spends more on stuff that maximises their time, whether it be on nannies, on gardeners, on air tasking, on getting other people to do stuff for them so they can free up their time to do what they want to do. Inconspicuous consumption is about spending on enlightenment, spending on education, on board games, on doing online courses. This is the rate of education as a percentage of income for rich people, for higher wealth people versus lower wealth people. That's my kid's Steiner school in East St Kilda. That school, all the toys are wooden. It doesn't believe in any brands. You can't have any brands or logos in the school displayed at all. And you pay $10,000 a year for the privilege, which is a delightful irony. But anyway, there you go. So we spend on enlightenment and education. We spend on health. We spend on our retirement. We spend on human capital investment. So we spend on stuff that actually starts to make our lives better. Adriana Huffington, who you know from the Huffington Post, has gone into Thrive. Thrive, a year and a half ago, did a massive joint venture with SAP, so that you can do your personal development on the project management infrastructure of corporations. Farmers markets obviously taking off, and so on and so on. So what we've done, Australia, we think, can help move wealthy, high-value travellers, help them jump off the treadmill, the hedonic treadmill, into enriching investments, where the more money we have, the better we become, because we're starting to spend it better. And then the better we become, the more money we'll get, and so on and so on and so on. So moving away from a kind of an overtly consumerist kind of mindset to moving towards stuff that helps us kind of have a more fulfilled, better life is potentially what high-value travellers want. Cool. So, and the reason why I want to talk about that is because they've got more money, and that's the reason why I also said at the very beginning of this presentation that we're a long way away, we're expensive to get to. It's a wealthy thing that's going to attract wealthy people. So hopefully that gives you a mindset of potentially where wealth as a humane society is going to. So how do we communicate with these people? To communicate with travellers, to get them here, there's kind of 3 things we need to do. The first thing is everybody has most of their life not thinking about where they're going to go on holidays or where they're going to travel. We're just going about our life. Then there's a potential trigger. You see a movie, or you think, you read a book or something, you think, God, I really need a holiday, or I want to go away. The role of all communications in that time is to have saliency, be top of mind, or as your kind of research said, drive consideration. Get into the consideration set. You don't have a need to travel to Australia, you have a need to go on a holiday. You don't have a need for a Coca-Cola, you have a need for a drink. And then once that need at a category level is triggered, it's your job to kind of fight within that. Once you get into the consideration set, or the need for that consideration set gets triggered, it's then your job to prove that you have value. That's in active consideration. And so for Australia, then, they have to prove that we have value and that they purchase us. And once they purchase us, we want to kind of retain them, or at least give them a positive experience, so the next time the consideration set gets triggered, they choose us, and it's a smaller kind of consideration set. And there, we can focus on the experience. So they're the 3 things I'm going to talk about now: passive consideration, active consideration, and retention. So passive consideration. How do we build passive consideration? Anybody know this chap, Byron Sharp? So Byron Sharp is the head marketing scientist at the Ehrenberg Bass Institute in South Australia. He's probably the leading marketing scientist in the world, and he's written loads and loads and loads of kind of books on books and papers and so forth on marketing and marketing expenditure in order to drive brand growth. And when he gets asked the question, how much money shall I spend on marketing? Guess what his answer is? Anyone? 0? No. Yeah, thank you for breaking the awkwardness in the room. Any other guesses? How much money should you spend to build a brand? His answer is spend as much as you can. Just get your brand out there as much as possible. The next question is how should you spend it? And his answer to that is equally as facetious, but is probably pretty accurate. He says you take your total budget and you divide it by 12, and then you spend about 1/12 of that every month. Is kind of the ideal marketing strategy. So there you go. It's all of Ehrenberg Bass's intellect into those two little points. So if you do that, then what the next point is we have to communicate in a way that they think is Australian. And so we know we went too bogan, and then we've kind of before that we over-egged it. We went too pretentious, too up our own arse, and now it feels like we've got it just about right with this type of communications now, which is what the world expects of Australia, and it's what they buy into. It's a view of Australia that resonates with people. So spend as much as we can, spend it about every, kind of consistently throughout the year, and spend it in a way that accords with their view of what we're about. But then the next thing is, we have to remember that everything communicates. So what's Australia's brand book? So if we have our Tourism Australia ads, we have all the state advertising and so forth. It's a very small part of the overall pie of what communicates. And if we want to stay top of mind towards consumers and kind of increase saliency, then every Bluestone coffee in New York they buy, every time they use Aesop products, every Margot Robbie film they see, every time they try Vegemite, all of that should be reinforcing the Australia in their head and staying in their consideration set for the next time they have the need to travel. So active consideration. Once they've decided they're going to travel and they're going to have a holiday, how do we make sure that they actively choose us over others? And this is where we have to communicate value. So please don't try to convince anybody we're close by. We're not. And the people, I know there's some people from Tourism Western Australia in the room, and I've had very similar conversations with them. They're not even close by within a world that's not even close by. Although I'm sure they will be claiming it now with direct flights from London. So we're not close by. And one of the things I'd like to talk about a little bit is about Batman. And Batman's my favourite superhero. And Batman was different to every other kind of superhero in that he had no superpowers. He got his strength from, yes, he got it from his toys, he got it from all of his money, but where he really gets his strength from is from his mind. And Batman did something very courageous when he got all the money and he wanted to become a superhero. He embraced his biggest fear, which was his fear of bats, which he developed as a kid, and he became Batman. And not only did he embrace his fear and become Batman, he amplified that to the world, and he got his strength from amplifying his biggest weakness, which was his fear of bats. And if he amplified that, then there was authenticity in that, there was honesty in that, and there was a truth in that. And so Batman stole a lot of his stuff from Carl Jung. Carl Jung is a psychologist who studied under Freud, and Carl Jung believed in the collective unconscious and believed in the whole concept of the shadow. And you can't have a true authentic self unless you embrace your shadow or embrace your weaknesses. Carl Jung in turn stole a lot of his stuff from the concept of yin and yang from Chinese philosophy, which is two opposing forces, light and dark, fire and water, masculine and feminine, coming together to create a greater whole. So by embracing our weakness, embracing the fact that we're far away, embracing the fact that we're this isolated little part of a world, it's true, it's what people buy into, and it's authentic. And not only is it all of those kind of things, so there's some good examples of other brands that have done it well. Weird things about Icelanders. Iceland's weird. They took that on the chin and they kind of communicated that to the world. What happened in Vegas is kind of dodgy, and they've kind of communicated that to the world. So if we can communicate the fact that we're a long way away, this distance is a proof point. It's a proof point of having really good quality food and wine and gin. It's a really... it's a good proof point of having weird animals like quokkas. That's Barry Marshall, who won the Nobel Prize, who's one of the most weird people you could ever meet. Wearing thongs at work, creating a game like AFL. The distance, having a massive casualised culture where you can get away with taking the piss out of a CEO at a conference. It's all of this kind of stuff is the fact we can do all this is because we're free from the shit that the rest of the world has to deal with. And that's what people are buying into. They know we're a long way away. Saying we're not isn't true. Just embrace it. It's a substantiation. It's what they want. Especially if you think about high-value travellers in terms of what they're after. They're after enriching experiences that will genuinely improve their lives. They want to go somewhere kind of magical and special. So, distance substantiates. High-value travellers have money. They work hard and have limited time, but they want to spend it on things that make their lives better. That's not easy. Therefore, they want to ensure that they have a unique, enriching experience. Distance away will reassure them that they're having an experience like no other, but coming here alone isn't enough. The next thing we need to do is, once they're here, we need to get retention. And to do this, we need to stop trying to ingratiate ourselves to our customers. Stop trying to ingratiate ourselves to people coming here. Stop asking, what can we do for you? Ask what they can do for us. And just to explain that a little bit, the best example I've seen of that is from IKEA. This is a heat map of an IKEA floor plan. And so when you go into IKEA, you spend about an hour in IKEA before you actually end up buying anything. You spend a long time before you get into any zone where you can actually buy. And what that does is it kind of increases your debt of how much time and effort you've spent there. So therefore you have to justify to yourself that this trip out to IKEA and spending all that time there is worth it. You end up buying a whole lot of discretionary items, and they have a massive AWOC because of that store design that keeps you in the store for a long time. You think about that in terms of our flight to Australia. There's a lot of sunk costs in that you have to make up for by having an enriching experience. I would not be talking about the direct flight from the UK to Perth. I would ask the pilot to do a couple of bog laps around before landing. Or IKEA would if they did that. The more they'll get you to invest as much as they possibly can before they set you free in this kind of spending frenzy. The next thing IKEA does, and to get really strong investment, is they get you to finish the job for them. They get you to co-create the products, and this has been studied a lot by Professor Michael Norton at Harvard Business School, and has looked at the value that increases about 30% for items that you co-create or finish yourself. So if you finish a piece of IKEA furniture, you'll put about a 30% premium on that if you have to sell that back to the experimenter versus just being given it. So we tend to value stuff we co-create much more than stuff that gets given to us on a plate. And if you think about, again, the high-value traveller, they want to have these kind of enriching experiences that they have a say in that they help co-create. So they want experiences, not possessions, and they want active, not passive experiences. By active experiences, we mean contribution, connections, or co-creation. The more they invest, the more they're going to like us. 3 examples that do this really well. The first one's Mona. All of you would have been to Mona, of course, and used their O thing, the OPAD. The OPAD, when it first started, that little bit of tech, you'd go around and look at all the art, and you'll mark what you liked and what you didn't like. And all the stuff that got lots of likes, David Walsh would take off the walls and not show again. And he would only kind of keep on showing the stuff that people didn't like. That's him for you. But anyway, so it gave you a sense of contribution, but he then turned that on its head. Another one is connections. There's a nice little restaurant in Richmond. I don't know the name of it. But it's the butcher that cooks for you. You go into this little butcher and you kind of pick your meats. You stand in line. And then you kind of go and sit down, and then the butcher will kind of make that and kind of cook it for you. And then the final thing about co-creation is this is just another day in WA. This is my favourite tweet from that campaign which we co-created. Even the sharks are on meth. It's not the best tweet to show at a tourism conference. I appreciate that. But what it did was it allowed people to kind of co-create the campaign with us, allowed everybody to kind of do a humble brag about this is just another day in WA. And if you're going to do that and you're going to co-create these types of campaigns, then again, if you're thinking about the Batman and it's kind of staring your biggest weaknesses in the face and not being afraid to air those, then things like that tend to come out. But that to me just says authenticity. It says people are getting involved. And when I saw that tweet, I never said to my dear clients at the time how good I thought that tweet was. I would have sacked me at the time. But anyway, I loved it. Cool. So get them to invest. I won't worry about that. So wrapping up. In the whole world, our target market's minuscule. We can get to know them really well. It's a very, very small percentage of people who come here. That's still a massive amount of people. It's a long way to get to, and that's a good thing. It helps substantiate why we're so special. Don't kind of ever downplay that. It's wonderful. People increasingly value experiences over possessions. That's actually making them happier and more fulfilled consumers because they're doing that. And they're seeking active experiences, not passive experiences, wherever they go. They want to contribute, co-create those experiences, not just go and stand, anyway, or do so. I can't say something there without insulting someone. They want to spend in a manner that makes them a better person, create opportunities for enriching investment, stuff that makes them feel better, stuff that kind of gives them some sense of actualisation or some kind of enlightenment. Think like IKEA and work out what they can give us, not what we can give them. And also do stuff that makes Australia proud and go, yes, that's it, that's what we're about, which is what I think the Dundee campaign, as an example, has done very well. Thank you.
Awesome, Adam. Thank you
Cool.
so much. So much food for thought there, and I love the whole concept of looking at what you're fearful of, turning it around and making it creative. And I know I'm going to blow Ballarat's trumpet again, but that's exactly what Sovereign Hill did when everyone said, God, it's so cold in Ballarat. It's freezing. No one wants to come here. And they said, you know what? Let's create the Winter Wonderland program.
Right.
And let's make winter the actual, the whole feature and the attraction. And now it's one of the most successful campaigns. And we've got so many people coming over from China to do it. We're running out of time because you need to run. So let's have a look, maybe one quick question. Here we go.
Go for it.
There we go. Good catch.
Thanks, Adam. I just wanted to, how much of this is relevant in a B2B environment? A lot of us in the room work in a B2B context or in a B2 retail context. How much of this should we carry into or...
I just can't work out what the difference between B2B and B2C is, because B2B still is, at the end of the day, another human buying into a message that you have to say as a human. So I think the same thing still applies, and I think whether you're selling conference space or trying to get an export deal, I still think at the end of the day you're dealing with humans, so I think the same thing applies.
Another quick question for Adam. You do loud voice.
Passive. Does that apply across, do you think, all cultures, or is there some cultural differences there?
I think it applies across all cultures, because what you're asking them to do is to invest into you. The more they invest into you, the more they like you. So that's kind of been quite well established in psychology. The nature of the experience those people have and will feel comfortable doing will vary by culture significantly.
One more maybe, super quick one. Anyone else? Well,
God bless you all. Thank you.
awesome. Big round of applause. Well done, Adam.
Cool.
Great to
Cheers,
see
mate.
you.